Hi, I'm Jackie Cohen-Roth, founder and CEO of CannabizMD, and I'm introducing to you today is sister social enterprise TPad. CannabizMD is focused on filling the void of cannabis science education, while TPad, the sister social enterprise, is focused on breaking down barriers to entry into the cannabis industry, as well as barriers to advancement, no matter gender or race, via education. I am excited to have my guest on our CannabizMD Video Profile today, where his company is one of the sponsors of TPad. March 25th, we're hosting a TPad that's focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's executing your DEI strategy, connecting with your community. March 25th, 7 to 9 p.m. East Coast time, and we're going to be hosting that on Zoom. You'll be able to find tickets on Eventbrite, as well as links to tickets on TPAD's website, teapad.co, and cannabizmd.com. DEI, again, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a key element of success for any company, regardless of its industry. It's particularly a critical element in the cannabis industry, and states are requiring DEI initiatives for successful license applications with compliance mandatory. It's a particularly critical element in the cannabis industry, given its roots founded in racial prejudice. States are requiring, again, DEI initiatives for successful license applications with mandatory compliance. Compliance is an issue that we're going to be talking about, as well as executing that DEI strategy. A DEI strategy should include C-suite commitment to implementing best recruiting practices, improving trainings, and building external partnerships. A workforce with diverse life experiences should marry the community it serves. The conversation that I'll be moderating on March 25th is with cannabis industry professionals, a DEI expert, and a community advocate. Dr. Tiffany Bowden, Virginia Edwards, and Otha Smith are going to be joining me on how a cannabis company should execute a successful DEI strategy that positively impacts the community that it serves, as well as how it creates a successful business model for that respective company. Also excited at this virtual TPad, we are going to include live jazz, which is part of every TPad experience. And in particular, this one is exciting, is that TPad has its roots in Baltimore, and I'm excited to provide a national platform to two jazz musicians who have been hosting porch concerts during COVID. There's a couple of really fantastic musicians that I've had the opportunity to meet, and I will be very excited to have them join and give you a listen to them as well. TPAD is about making change and challenging the industry to truly walk the talk of DEI. So on to today's guest. Liberty Cannabis is a sponsor of the March TPAD. Cannabis Cares is the corporate social responsibility arm, that's CSR, of Holistic Industries. Holistic Industries is one of the largest private vertically integrated multi-state operators in the cannabis industry. Joining me for today's conversation focused on DEI, the Jewish principle of Tikkun Olam, which is the foundation of both CannabizMD and TPAD, and the historic relationship that Jews have to social justice, is Rabbi James Kahn. Welcome, Rabbi James.
Thank you, Jackie. It's just total pleasure to be here. And I love TPAD. I just love the concept. I love jazz. I love, I'm just excited to talk to you. So I'm glad.
Me too. So let's share a little bit about you. Is that you are an ordained rabbi and the National Director of Community Outreach for Holistic Industries. At Holistic, Rabbi James heads Liberty Cannabis Cares, again, the company's corporate social responsibility platform, which is primarily focused on issues related to social equity, diversity, community engagement, and cannabis literacy. I mean, this just is a perfect fit for CannabizMD and TPAD. Rabbi James joined Holistic in 2017, opening and operating Holistic's first medical dispensary, Liberty Rockville. His work in cannabis began in 2011 when he and his family opened Tacoma Wellness Center, now the largest medical cannabis dispensary operating in DC. His stores have received Americans for Safe Access's Patient First certification, were voted DC's best by Washington City Papers for 4 years running, and have been profiled in numerous publications, including Time Magazine and Forward Magazine. Rabbi James is a member of CLAL's Rabbis Without Borders Fellowship and sits on the advisory board of United States Veterans Chamber of Commerce. Prior to his work in cannabis, Rabbi James served as senior Jewish educator at the University of Maryland Hillel, director of chaplain, I'm not going to pronounce that correctly.
Chaplaincy.
There we go.
Yeah.
At the Jewish Social Service Agency, JSSA, rabbinic director for DC's Hebrew Free Burial Society, rabbinic administrator for the Washington Board of Rabbis. So welcome, Rabbi James.
Thank you. Good to get a recap of what I've been up to last few years.
Yeah, a little bit busy.
Yeah, it's been busy.
Yeah. So, well, let's first start off with the family. Your dad's a rabbi as well, Rabbi. He's a
rabbi.
Kahn, and you're Rabbi James.
Yeah.
As everybody's going to be, how do a couple of rabbis? Is your mom a pharmacist?
No. Well, no, okay. But she's a nurse. She's a medical
nurse, so healthcare provider.
Yes.
Yeah, and so what led the family to cannabis?
It was personal. Ultimately it was personal. I think, there's a few different things that happened that converged at the same time in our family. One was my father's pulpit. So my dad's currently very much focused on our cannabis, on the industry and on our family's business in DC. But at the time, for most of my childhood, he was a pulpit rabbi for 30 years. And his rabbinate coincided with the AIDS crisis. So he was one of these clergy members who was, there at the beginning when, we just didn't know what was happening and people were dying and no one understood. And it was terrifying. And we had members of our synagogue who had passed away, and he was just quite involved with that. And I know that there was some early, cannabis was relevant to those folks as a way to cope with some of the, and still is for a lot of people with HIV and AIDS.
Those same advocates.
Yeah.
Those AIDS advocates led to the legalization of cannabis in California. So super impactful. Yeah.
Super impactful. But I think ultimately it was my grandfather. So my mom's father at the age of 35 was diagnosed with MS. And he had a particularly, devastating case of it. By the time he was my age, 7 years later, I'm almost 42. He was completely bedbound and suffered from spasms and chronic pain and just pretty much a living nightmare for them. And they tried everything to find some sort of relief and some sort of hope. The story I always stuck with me was when my grandfather in the 70s tried snake venom a doctor recommended it. That's kind of, when I remember my grandfather with his like the top part of his arms was like solid brick from all the injections of opiates that he took over the years. I mean, the guy suffered a lot. And one of the only things that helped him was cannabis. An aide gave it to him while my family was actually living in Australia. We were so. And we when we came back, it was evident that this was helping him, and we tried to find a source for him after that aid left, and it was always challenging. And that frustration, the sadness of watching someone suffer, knowing there's something that could help them, it just consumed us. And my parents had a lot of energy that they focused towards social justice causes, and they turned it all to focus on cannabis. My dad started working, he was a director of an organization called the Interfaith Drug Policy Alliance, which pulled progressive clergy from all over the map to educate them and then hopefully get them to lobby for progressive drug reform. The end of mandatory minimum sentences, treatment over incarceration, all that stuff. So anyway, that's really kind of ultimately what led our family down this path. And my grandfather, just being who he was not, he wasn't a hippie. He was pretty much, he really kind of, cursed hippies, and he saw cannabis as a hippie drug. And it was really a difficult decision for him, I'm sure, to use cannabis. And we wanted to create a store that he would have felt comfortable coming into, that took the medical components of the drug seriously, that educated its staff, that didn't have didn't smell too heavily of Nag Champa, even though I love Nag Champa. It just wasn't a head shop, and so that's what we did. So my mom's healthcare background and my dad's kind of bedside manner and background as a clergy, it really combined to form a pretty amazing place at Tacoma. And then I brought that with me, that kind of ethos and that the model that we started in DC with me to Maryland when I opened up Liberty Rockville, and we started expanding with holistic industries, at least on my end of things, not my family, but my end.
So did your grandfather ultimately use cannabis?
Oh yeah. He did. In fact, the first bong I ever found was in his basement when I was a kid. I was home. I was sick, and my mom and dad both worked, so they dropped me at my grandparents. And I was in their basement going through their stuff, and I found some old graphics, like neon green, see-through plastic bong, and I had no idea what it was, but it had been altered so my grandfather they could attach it to the wall. My grandmother had to work after my grandfather stopped being able to get out of bed on his own. And so he was left by himself at home. And so to be able to use cannabis, easy, when you're shaking and you have very little dexterity, even lighting a match or a lighter was difficult. So they would attach the water pipe to the wall, and then that freed him to be able to access it. And so he absolutely did, but he never had a consistent supply. It was, in fact, the other reminiscing I'll do is that when I was, I think, 14 or 15, my grandfather called me over when my grandmother was hiding in the kitchen smoking a cigarette, and he called me over and asked me if I could get him pot. And that was, a 14-year-old getting asked by their grandfather for pot it's a unique experience. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that personal story. Some of the greatest advocates in this industry have these personal connections, and that's a unique one with your grandfather. And I'm so, it's a great positive story. Share, all the tragic of the impact that it has on him, his ability to be a rabbi, and then
we've taken it, and we've, when you walk into my family store in DC, it's the first picture you see is a picture of my grandparents. So we've taken their struggle and tried to help people and used it to help others.
Yeah. And that, that's a great lead in to the relationship that Jews have to social justice. And for me, so this principle, Hebrew principle, tikkun olam, which literally means repair of the world, the impact certainly of on my father's side of the family. My mother had converted to Judaism, a very disparate background that she had, but I was raised as a Jew and have that principle of repair of the world, whatever that I can do to do my part, and that is via education, and particularly education about cannabis, whether it's the scientific background of cannabis and clinical applications to the relationship as well with social justice and equity. So if you would explain, Rabbi James, as what is the history and what is the connection that Jews have with social justice, and how do these come together?
Yeah, happy to. So actually, if you would have, gone back even a few hundred years into Eastern Europe and talked about tikkun olam to a rabbi, they would have looked at you a little funny. It was not a concept in the same way it is now in contemporary Jewish life. However, it certainly was a concept, and from the very early on in the Jewish development of Jewish theology and religiosity, it became the way that the rabbis saw the Jewish people were as partners with God, that God created a world that was unfinished, and that was a gift to humanity because it gave us purpose. And our job, and this gets even more. The story gets even more unique and interesting when you go looking at it from a mystical perspective. But because the Jewish mystics see that there's sparks, that they believe that with creation there was this kind of perfection moment that was then kind of shattered, and that the world is full of these sparks of pure divinity and pure goodness, and our job is to raise them up. That often they can have a lot of gook on them, and you don't see them, and so our job is to take them and to clean them off and to raise them up and that's our job as human beings, not just Jews. But that's just the Jewish vision of humanity, and I think as a people that were defined early on as being homeless. We were searching. God, Abraham was told to leave, go forth to a land that I will show you, and to leave the land that he knew. There was a certain vulnerability that I think came with that. So we've always been sensitive to to what it feels like to be the other, to not feel. I'll leave it at that. And so I think that there's some historical sensitivities, and then this kind of core way of looking at the world as unfinished, and as our job to perfect it, and to partner with God, making it a good world.
Well, thank you for that. I had never heard that I guess it would be a mystical perspective on the relationship and our responsibility of Tikkun Olam. And it's also, identify with the shared experiences that we have had historically with prejudice. I guess since time in memoriam as Jews, and then for many of us in recent history, where my relationship goes back to my grandmother, which is just 2 generations ago, where she was in a village in Belarus that is now part of Poland. And as a 15-year-old, she was given the option of either staying and getting her throat slit by what became Nazism, or leave on her own. And as a 15-year-old, she emigrated from this village to London, to Montreal, and ultimately to Milwaukee, and married a much older a rabbi, and the Kohen. And those my personal experiences of prejudice. My father raised me. My father tricked my grandmother into signing the paperwork. She couldn't read or write English, so that he could join the army at age 16 to go kill the Nazis. He was awarded a Purple Heart for his efforts. I grew up with the story where he actually came face to face, as he said, with a pimply Nazi, and my father had won awards for his marksmanship, and he said in German to this Nazi to run, and he didn't shoot him and didn't kill him. And that relationship of ultimately of character and respect for human life.
Yeah.
It's
that's beautiful. I mean, that's also at the heart of, I think, the Jewish focus on Tikkun Olam is a sense of innate value that is present in every human being. It's in the Hebrew words are B'Tselem Elohim, and it's a reference to Genesis, the book of Genesis, where humans are created in God's image. So shooting a human is shooting a reflection of the divine. So it's never to be taken lightly, and even in a time of war.
And then to where we are today with the cannabis industry, as I shared in the intro of here we have this history of this industry, or the drug policy rather, of the United States, founded on prejudice, which is just driven by this man in the 1930s, Harry Anslinger, and the story is of how he was focused on pretty much annihilating Billie Holiday, and that's the connection again that CannabizMD has with TPad. Is here's again CannabizMD focused on the cannabis science, and TPad focused on social justice and diversity and inclusion in the industry. And if not for that time and this history of decades of racially prejudiced drug laws that then expanded throughout the world, and it's really powerful and obviously incredibly unfortunate. So the shared focus again on repairing the world as best we can, and that is repairing the communities, the families, the people's lives that have been decimated by the war on drugs.
I think we have a story that needs a better ending. The fact is, just as you said, cannabis, the origins of the modern cannabis industry are in incredibly painful place of racist drug laws for at least the last century, and we as part of the modern cannabis industry, I feel a deep sense of obligation to ensure that that's not the end of the story, that we have this opportunity now and it's not an opportunity that I take lightly, which is to shape an industry. This is still early on in the industry. We're just getting started, and we need to take seriously our past and to make sure that it does not become our future. So that's a big part of what what brought me to cannabis and what keeps me here.
Yeah, well, and then that's a great segue to your role with Holistic Industries and Liberty Cannabis Cares. So there are the pillars that are again in perfect alignment with the missions of both CannabizMD. The pillars are social equity, diversity, community, and cannabis literacy. So in your role with Holistic Industries and Liberty Cannabis Cares, what are you personally doing?
Yeah.
How do you execute?
Well, those are not those four topics are the topics that we as a company care most about. It's not that we are always succeeding in all of those places, but
no.
we
it would be a different. I mean, again, it would be a different cannabis industry if you were. Right?
Yeah. But it keeps us up at night that we're not. And that's why I can work for this company, and that's why I'm so proud to work for the company. And that they hired a rabbi to help lead the charge is it's been a great job for me. I love every day. And what am I doing? So a lot of different things. I recently brought someone onto my team, and we're just connected to every part of the company. So we work with HR to establish hiring practices that ensure that we look like the communities that we're in. It starts really there. It starts with even where we locate our businesses. So we purposely locate our cultivation facilities in underserved areas. This is helpful for licensing because you get additional points in some states, but even in those states we don't. We still look for those opportunities where we can that our presence will be able to make a real difference. It's kind of, we take a regional approach, and that allows us to kind of go deep into dig a deeper hole instead of a bunch of shallower holes. So based on where we choose our location for those facilities, working with HR to create to identify talent within the company and to promote from within, and especially looking for folks who are folks of color who we could help train and give opportunity to at the company. We work with, and it's not just diversity for us is pretty expansive, although our central focus is on repairing the damage to the Black community, which has really taken the deepest trauma from these drug laws. But I just had a great conversation with a company that works in Missouri to get jobs for people on this autism spectrum. Look, and another conversation last week with a company that works to find employment for people who are visually impaired. So we're trying to take. I think of it this way: social equity is often looked at as licenses. Who's getting these licenses? But there's only a handful of licenses, and hopefully, we can make those as diverse as possible. But there's a lot of other opportunities, affiliated with the cannabis industry and within it, to have quality jobs with great benefits and hopefully some equity in a company. And so we're making sure we get those jobs to the right people, and that there's it's a diverse group of people. And we're trying to, so I work with HR. We're doing we're partnering with historically Black colleges and universities to be able to get in front of their students, to be able to talk about the opportunities in the industry. Last year I had the opportunity to work with it's now called the Mid-Atlantic Cannabis Conference, but last year it was called The Color of Cannabis, and it's out of Philly, and it's a conversation on looking at all the drug policies in the Mid-Atlantic area from a perspective of how it's impacting people of color and opportunities within the industry. So we sponsor different events. We try to hire diverse, as diverse as possible, a staff, and we train, and I'm trying to educate from within, whether it's diversity training, anti-racism training. We are, education's everything. That's been the model of TPad, I see, which that's just a Jewish model.
Yeah, and I would say education is also one of those shared Jewish focuses, that we are, raised to be overeducated, right?
Yeah, and that education has helped us, survive in a lot of different circumstances.
Yes, yeah.
And so focusing on education is kind of the hope of how we can make change and make people aware of the injustices that have happened. I think is just a big part of owning that past, so that we can then make a better future. Because if you don't know about it, if you just are blissfully unaware, while that might be pleasant for you, it's not helping make change, and it's certainly not doing anything to create a different future.
Yeah, and I don't want to make light of the fact is that as Jews that we're raised to be overeducated, but that we are raised with, I know with back to my father's experience, where he went to undergraduate and then he went to medical school on the GI Bill. And then he and my mom raised 4 children. I'm about to finish up my graduate degree. My siblings are, college educated. My sister's a physician. And that yet my grandmother couldn't read or write in any language, which is just to me incredibly powerful. Wow. And to take these opportunities that we have been given, and that is part of the inspiration behind TPad, is that proceeds of TPad events do support the TPad Scholarship for Black Entrepreneurship at Morgan State University, recognizing again that not everybody has been afforded this opportunity for secondary education. And then what's new for us this year, and particularly then launching with this March TPad, is recognizing not everybody is on the path to secondary education. That may not be the way for you to enter into the cannabis industry. And so we are going to provide TPad grant, and so that it affords somebody the opportunity to take one of the several and more great opportunities for education, not necessarily to be an entrepreneur, but whether to be a well-educated dispensary attendant or somebody to work in cultivation, processing, what have you.
Yep. We, I'd love offline. We could talk about how you made that happen with Morgan State, because I really believe that scholarships are important, and that while it's not the only way to enter the industry by far, it is. I do think that the leaders of the future of the cannabis industry are probably, some of them are in those programs, happening at schools across the country. And those programs lack most of the time scholarships, grant monies, any access to federal dollars. So unless you have 30,000 bucks or something to that effect to cough up, it's not going to be as diverse a group as we want to see in the future of cannabis. So we have to provide those. I think for now, the private companies and other stakeholders need to provide those funds. But I've had trouble when I've reached out to universities getting them to take our money because it's seen as drug money.
Yeah, absolutely. 2 years ago, with CannabizMD, I tried to connect actually with my undergraduate school. They did respond. Found through a professor of mine, and connected me with a student. And unfortunately, she was counseled by her parents not to have an internship with a cannabis company on her resume. And here's an opportunity to help shape an industry, via education. I mean, whatever you can do. And then this fear of within the universities themselves, as others that I reached out to for internships, is that fear of losing federal grants, losing that federal money. Right on point is actually about to finish up graduate school, the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy. And the dean, Natalie Eddington, shares a really powerful story when she and the program director, Dr. Leah Sarah, were launching the program, and it was going to be plant touching. Dr. Eddington shared with me that the Attorney General, Brian Frosch, called her up and said, if you continue with this program as is, you personally will be arrested for drug trafficking. Isn't that wild?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wild and disturbing.
Yeah. So the program became online. But, since this program was the first to launch in the country, since then, there are now programs with universities, in Colorado of note, that actually are plant touching.
Yeah.
And it's, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry that we are just at the foundations and having it be born, and not to recognize that this is an opportunity to create jobs is just short-sighted. And that then is a segue into Maryland, as we're both based in Maryland. As I say, Maryland now has the opportunity where we are recording this at the beginning of March. Maryland's legislative session ends April 12th, and we're looking at the legalization of cannabis. And there are some great social equity measures within that legislation, startup funds, training, all of these elements. And so, a month ago, I would have said, I don't think it's going to happen with, some of the, this conservative drivers of our policy. But yet we have Virginia just legalized.
Yep.
New Jersey has legalized. Pennsylvania has it in the works. And
DC is
and DC. So this is it would be very short-sighted to lose this opportunity for tax revenue.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And to fund social services, as well as put Maryland citizens in danger if they end up going out of state. And it actually is a federal offense, as you know, to cross state line.
Yep. It's so painfully obvious that legalization is the better. I often ask people who are against, who for some reason tell me, I kind of get medical cannabis, but the research just isn't there yet, and I say, well, I'm like, well, that's even if I want to agree with you, which I don't, that there's no research, what do you want us to do with people? You want us to put people in jail who touch a plant? I mean, this is insane. We can't do this. This is not right. It's not just. And it's, and often when people think about it as from a punishment perspective, it sometimes can change, how they look at it. But COVID is going to push an economic challenge like nothing else. I mean, cities, states, the budgets are going to be blown. They're going to be looking for alternative sources of revenue, of means of generating taxes, and cannabis is just perfect for them. And I think, COVID's been a big deal for cannabis. It's been a moment of of recognizing its value, when push comes to shove, and we had to decide what's essential and what's not.
Right.
What a moment for cannabis. So I think cannabis has helped a lot of people get through COVID in this past
Yes.
year, and that it
The
will help a lot of
anxiety.
states
Yes.
get out
Yes.
of this mess. I hope.
Yeah, and I think also is that with I push this messaging a lot with Cannabis MD, is that again the focus on filling the void of cannabis science education. It is because cannabis is classified as Schedule 1 drug, meaning that it has no medical benefit and presents a danger. And that's not the exact wording of the DEA, but again, this is preventing medical schools. 97% of medical schools do not include cannabis education. There are huge bound barriers for researchers to be able to get approved by the FDA to then approach the DEA to be able to conduct research, that then we will have that FDA double-blind gold standard placebo studies that we can turn around and say, yes, now we have the research that cannabis companies are doing on their own. You and I spoke offline about Israel, and the research that is coming out of Israel, and this is also, I think, a failing of the U.S. federal government, is this is a missed opportunity to be a leader.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's if you want to boil it down to, the economics. I mean, this is a way where the United States could shine as well. And
You've got no fight from me.
yeah.
and I think no fight from the and this crazy thing is there's no fight with the majority of Americans. I mean, this is a while I'm not someone who fully believes cannabis has been normalized yet. It certainly has in a lot of my communities. Granted, I just have one little part of the world, and I recognize that. We've got a long ways to go on a policy level, but the majority of Americans, whether they're Democrats or Republicans or independents, support at least medical cannabis, and majority support some form of legalization as well.
Yes, yeah, and the majority of Americans now are living in states that have medical cannabis.
Yep.
They have access to medical cannabis, and healthcare providers are being bound without the opportunity that they have the academic resources and research that's necessary for them to provide quality patient care. But bit by bit, advocates and companies, advocates like yourself and companies like Holistic Industries are helping to lead the change and charge.
And I think just individual, when it really boils down to is it's my grandpa. And don't mess with my grandpa and my grandma. My grandmother died from cancer, but she really died from wasting away because she couldn't eat anymore because she had no appetite. And I know if we could have gotten her some cannabis oil, I just know it would have helped her. I once I remember someone came into the dispensary a year ago or so. It was an older lady, and she came in. She was a caregiver for her grandson, who was at Children's Hospital at the moment, and who had some form of and she was asking me, I hear cannabis gives you the munchies, and my grandson is not eating. And she's like, do you think it could give him the munchies? You think it could work? And I said, I think it's worth trying, and it was so, she could never imagine cannabis in her life. I mean, she felt I could just tell the way she walked in that this was a terrifying experience for her. And yet it was her grandkid, and she would have done anything for her grandson. Yeah. And when it's that, I think it's going to be, I speak to a lot of different hospices around the state and in other states and nursing homes and assisted living facilities. And I tell them in the next decade, you are going to be hearing from more and more of your customers that this is what's going to give you a competitive edge, because cannabis has the potential to transform end-of-life care, has the potential to transform, the care we give to our to aging adults. And it's just, it's just going to become, I think it's going to become a necessity if for physicians to be relevant to their patients. I hope. If it's not going to come from the top down, I don't see medical schools changing anytime soon. But I see patients changing.
Yeah, and I also I lost both my mother and my sister to cancer, and
Sorry to hear that.
what same thing of what cannabis would have done for them, as the not having the appetite, and the power of the drugs, chemotherapy that kept them alive up to a certain point, but ultimately, as your body, if you're wasting away, you don't have that strength to fight it. Yeah. In any event, I want to thank you for your time today. I'm so grateful to Holistic Industries and your CSR, Liberty Cannabis Cares, to support TPad and help us explain what DEI is, how impactful it is for a cannabis company to succeed, how impactful it is for communities and human lives to move forward, and then your part in the education of how proceeds of TPad support the TPad Scholarship for Black Entrepreneurship at Morgan State, as well as our grants. So
we're proud to support you, and we will excited to continue this conversation and to continue supporting your work. And we rely, we're doing our thing, and we really are relying on on finding impassioned advocates to support and the right organizations to support. We see cannabis as a driver of social change, and we see that cannabis can be a force for good, and we're going to make it. We're going to make it so. Together.
Thank you. So if folks would like to learn more about Liberty Cannabis Care, where should they go?
Go to holisticindustries.com, go to libertycannabis.com, follow me at Rabbi Cannabis on Instagram.
That's unique.
And you can always reach out to me at rabbi@holisticindustries.com. I'm looking for folks like Jackie and for organizations like TPad to learn more and to support you. And just
thank you.
Great to be here. Thanks, Jackie.
Yeah, it's a very, very special conversation. To learn more about CannabizMD, our URL is CannabizMD.com. You can find us on IG. It's CannabizMD what is my URL? Cannabiz.md. TPad is tpad.co, and our IG is tpad_Baltimore. Giving a tremendous shout out to the connection that Baltimore has to jazz, the connection that Baltimore has to Black and Brown communities. And thank you. So look forward to seeing you and having you be part of our TPad on March 25th. And have a great rest of your day.
So exciting. Bye.
Bye.